Okay, everyone. So next up, we have Associate Professor of Practice Maha Bali from the American University in Cairo. And Maha is going to talk about beyond toxic positivity, care and equality beyond the pandemic. So over to you, Maha.
Thank you, Phil. Could you give my other account access as well? Presenter access as well? Because I'm on my phone and on the computer at the same time.
Okay, just bear with me.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So while Phil is sorting that out, tell me how you're feeling today. I always start my presentation asking people to share in the chat how they're feeling. And a big chunk of the presentation is going to ask you to respond to some questions in the chat. So people are saying all good, inspired, connected, good. If it's difficult to give me access, maybe you can share my slides, but I'm going to go really quickly through them, so I'm worried it's going to be too much for you. Oh, awesome. Perfect. Okay, so I'm the first perspective here from Egypt, and I put the link to the slides in the chat, so it's bit.ly/Bali Beyond Toxic. And whenever I'm asked to speak and write about the future, I often try to make it aspirational rather than predictive, and also reflective, because I think predictions don't usually work anyway. And I'm basing part of this on a series of unfortunate events. I haven't read the book. I've only watched some of the episodes on Netflix because as a parent yesterday, I had to spend a lot of time with my child and that's what she wanted to do. And I also had a mental block, so I wasn't working on my slides. So I got some inspiration from that. And it's such an appropriate title for what we've been going through the past year and a half. It's torturous to watch, kind of like the news about COVID was in the beginning, but it's also addictive, like you can't stay away. And you know what? Life is complex. I was talking about this on Twitter and someone let me know that the author, so his pen name Lemony Snickets, but his name is Daniel Handler, turns out to have said some racist comments, but I discovered that too late to remove this from my keynote. So I'm just acknowledging that I realized this about him. So here's a question for you. What's an unfortunate event that you felt really made this pandemic experience hit you harder? So tell me in the chat and I will read a few of those real quick. Homeschooling. Yes, that's like one thing that we didn't know we were going to have to do. We didn't sign up for that. Going through COVID yourself. Same for me. I went through COVID and my mother-in-law was in ICU. Thankfully, she survived, but some people haven't, right? I've also lost friends. I've lost pets. I've lost family members. There's so much that's been going on. Yeah. And the fatigue that comes in long COVID has been a huge thing as well, and the brain fog, right? I see people talking about that as well. And death of a parent, I'm so sorry. Yeah. And so when people are really positive about silver linings and how well we've survived this, it's kind of like this anxious clown restaurant in the series of unfortunate events. The waiter tells them this is a place where everybody has a good time, whether they like it or not. And have you experienced this during the pandemic where someone in your life was telling you to be positive, so your boss or people around you? So that's kind of toxic positivity, right? Excessive, ineffective overgeneralization of being happy, optimistic across all the states, right? And it's like a denial or minimization and invalidation of the authentic human experience. And it's used to cover up or silence the human experience, then it becomes toxic. And what's an example of that you found happening around you, toxic positivity? For me, the one that comes to mind was when my boss was talking about how, yay, the institution's probably going to open up face-to-face before they had even told us what the vaccine situation was going to be in Egypt. Like right now, we've got it, it's getting better, but at the time they decided to open up, they didn't tell us that. So that was, for me, a traumatic, I had just gotten over COVID. It was just before my boss herself got COVID. So she hadn't, the traumatic experience of that was really difficult for me. And I think going forward, we need to avoid this toxic positivity about a lot of different things. And I'm curious, what do you think we need to be avoiding toxic positivity about? I'm happy that some people are saying they're happy to find this term. Lack of communication, overall situation. Yeah. What do we want to avoid? Freedom Day. Okay, I don't know what that means. Perhaps we do it to our students online. Yeah, perhaps we do sometimes. Coming back to campus, come and look around first. Yeah, go back to when we get back to real life. Like we have to recognize, I think, what could go wrong. So the first one is this positivity about, oh, now everyone's experienced online digital learning and students and teachers are feeling okay about it. Actually, most students have experienced a bad version of teaching online, and most teachers struggled to manage. Even the ones who survived and were resilient, bravo that they did that. But it was difficult, and it was a lot of emotional labor for people who care about students. And it wasn't overall, I think, a positive experience for the majority of people in some ways, even the ones who did well. And this joy of being back, ignoring like kinds of restrictions in the ways like, for example, the masks. In Egypt, we have to still wear the masks in the classroom. And so that's going to make teaching difficult and listening to students in discussions difficult, right? And then going every day and having cases still rise is probably something that's going to create a lot of anxiety. The fact that children under a certain age are not vaccinated, and in Egypt, we don't have Pfizer, so we can't have children less than 18 vaccinated. So that's a lot of people who aren't vaccinated. And thinking about teachers who struggle to teach with cameras off, I didn't mind the cameras off, but with masks on, I can't even see their faces at all. And I can't even hear their voices. At least with the cameras off, I could hear their voices and I could see their names. How are you going to know one student from another when they're all masked up? And I think for young children, especially, their abilities to be social have been hindered a little bit. They haven't had enough practice. And the unequal impact of the pandemic on us is really important. And so in the series, Poe's wife celebrates front news wins that are actually bad news. And so things like centers like mine celebrating very large faculty attendance of our workshops is just because everyone's panicking because there's a pandemic, right? The alternatives to toxic positivity that have been found to be effective are tragic optimism and gratitude. And I'm not really sure what the tragic optimism is. I'll talk about it in a second. But gratitude journaling helped me a lot, helped my daughter find positive things in the midst of a lot of negativity. And it helped my students as well sort of find the good things in the day, recognizing that they were still suffering from other things. And tragic optimism, developed by Viktor Frankl, is about recognizing there is suffering, but to also recognize human achievement and accomplishment, and derive from guilt and opportunity to change for the better, and deriving from life's transitoriness and incentive to take responsible action. I'm going to go really quickly through the rest of the slides because I did over prepare today. And just asking you to think about what kind of loss or suffering you experienced in the past year and a half that has helped you grow over time. I really love this quote from Haruki Murakami, and I've never read any of his books, but it actually comes up in the series. And he's talking about how once the storm is over, you will remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't be sure whether the storm's really over, but for certain you've changed. You're a different person coming out. And I think that applies so well to what we're going through right now, but also to recognize that even though we all went through the same storm, we weren't all in the same boat, and there are a lot of inequalities. And so, for example, Black people in America face systemic racism and anti-Black violence. There's a lot of people for whom this pandemic was worse than it was for some of us. And one of the things that I also saw in the series was this cheer up cheeseburgers. Make sure you look inside before you eat it. It's called cheer up cheeseburger, but there might be something beyond that. And so thinking about things like introducing models like high flex as if they're magic solutions, but in reality, we need to realize that they're not easy to implement and it's difficult to manage them equitably. So we need to sort of stop this techno-positivism, believing that technology has solutions to our social problems. Now, I'm gonna skip a lot of this. And I also heard this Martin Luther King quote about morality that cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. Judicial decrees may not change the heart, but they can restrain the heartless. And I really love this quote. I'd never heard it before. And it just sort of shows you the limitations of what we can do with policy. But it reminds me of the equity care matrix that I worked on with Mia Zamora. And basically what we're saying is what's care without equity and what's equity without care. And what Martin Luther King Jr. is explaining over there is when you have equity in the policies, even if people don't care, there's some level of systemic equity going on. However, because people don't care, it can still become lip service or diversity theater or tokenism. And then if you have people who care, but the system is not equitable, you're going to have a lot of selective and effective labor. It's going to be more like a Band-Aid and ameliorative and not apply to everyone. And we should strive towards some kind of justice that applies all across the board and has parity of participation of students and teachers of different levels and staff, and talk a little bit more about those. So, for example, Brenna Clark-Gray, as an academic developer, talks about in order to do her job well, she invests in people and she cares. right? Because the university doesn't. But the more she does that, the less the university will do so. And it just keeps going. It's a cycle of inequity. And bell hooks remind us that teachers who care are often at odds with the environments they teach in. So this is just a real quick different levels of caring in your class, whether in the way you design it or in the way you respond in the situations. But the important thing is to think about doing unto others as they would have done unto them. And how can we do to students what they want us to do to them, not what we assume they want. So that's a platinum rule, not the golden rule. And that to assume that one model of care will work for everyone is absurd, because humans vary in their ability to give and receive care, and especially online. And this was why we developed these community building resources as a way of recognizing that there was tragedy going on and trauma, but how do we help people through it by building community in these classes? Because a lot of the value of in-person university experience happens outside the classrooms. And I know that the slides aren't moving properly anymore, because I'm seeing them on my other device that they're not moving. I'm almost done, so I'm just going to go through this last thing and read it out. I'm sorry that the slides aren't showing, but this is slide 48 if you're following on your own. So I'm just going to put a lot of things together and say that I think we should attempt to avoid toxic positivity going forward, and recognize there's been and will be suffering, even as the trauma of the main pandemic itself hopefully ends or slows down. There's still going to be the post-trauma. Continue to address that and support growth through suffering. We need to continue to build cultures of democratic care, which is like, how do we care in ways that recognize and give agency to everyone that we're caring about? And then not doing it in a way that the burden lies on like academic developers or a few caring teachers, but on everyone. And build in or co-create policies that support this. You want to be able to support people to care and to recognize and reward care. And care that does not harm others, because you need to co-create this kind of care as well and promote equity and accountability and prepare ourselves for uncertainty. So in academic development, this would mean moving away from teaching skills and doing digital literacies, focusing on fostering imagination and agency rather than doing any one-size-fits-all professional development, thinking of the educator as a whole person, including recognizing socio-emotional needs, and focusing on local professional development experiences and opportunity, which can be hybrid and virtual, so that we don't have to be just closed up in our own institutions. And all of this helps educators themselves also do the same for learners. And I'm going to just skip over all of this and say thank you, because I think I'm out of time.
Thank you, Maha. That was really good. Yeah, and we do seem to be having a few problems with slides and everything, myself included today. So I guess it's just a bad day for Teams. There have been a lot of people who have been really liking your quotes, have been agreeing with everything you've been saying, which is really nice to see. If anyone has a question for Maha, we are going into the break, but we've probably got time for one short question. So if anyone wanted to ask Maha anything, if you could just raise your hand now, and I will unmute you.
I'm putting the slides again in the chat. I did have them in earlier, but maybe someone missed them.
Okay, we don't have any hands up at the moment, but thank you so much. As you said, Maha is going to share the slides, and thank you for joining us all the way from Egypt. We're very honoured to have you here, so thank you.